Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are building a complete macroeconomic toolkit right from the ground up. We're going to treat this like a guided, step-by-step class to really demystify the complex fluctuations of the business cycle. You know, the booms, the recessions, and absolutely everything in between.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the macro toolkit basics, graduate to the short versus long run, dive into the Phillips curve trade-off, ask why are wages sticky, explore expectations and stagflation, and wrap it all up with supply shocks in action. Let's get right into it.
All right, Section 1, the Macro Toolkit Basics. Let's lay down our fundamental building blocks.
So our very first tool here is aggregate demand. But, rather than just thinking of it as simply total spending, let's really look at the mechanics under the hood. It relies heavily on the real money supply. When the general price level drops, the purchasing power of the money you already have suddenly surges, and that drives aggregate demand up. That specific relationship is exactly what creates this downward sloping curve.
And to balance that out, we've got aggregate supply. This is actually the price adjustment mechanism of the entire economy. It tracks exactly how much output firms are willing to produce at any given price level. Find where these two lines intersect and boom, you've found the equilibrium for both price and output. It's like a giant puzzle snapping together.
Moving right along to our intermediate tools, Section 2, short versus long run.
Now, time horizons literally change everything in macroeconomics. In the short run, we look through the Keynesian lens, where the supply curve is perfectly horizontal. Think about it. If there's high unemployment, a factory can just hire idle workers without needing to hike up wages, which means they can expand output without raising prices. But if you zoom out, say, 10 years to the classical view, that curve goes strictly vertical. You're at full employment. If demand spikes now, you can't magically print more workers out of thin air, right? So output stagnates, and only prices go up.
But wait a second. When we say full employment in that long-run model, does that actually mean zero unemployment? Well, actually, no. There is always going to be some frictional unemployment. That's just people voluntarily moving, searching for better roles, or freshly entering the workforce. Historically speaking, the Congressional Budget Office pegs this natural baseline right around 5.2%. Okay, Section 3, the Phillips curve trade-off.
Back in 1958, an economist named A.W. Phillips, who, fun fact, actually started his career as a crocodile hunter and engineer, published this massive study on wage behavior. He found a strict inverse relationship between unemployment and inflation. And honestly, it felt like a cheat code for policymakers. It meant that in the short run, buying a full-point drop in unemployment only really cost about half a point of inflation.
Now, to make this trade-off practically useful, we apply Okune's law. It's essentially a simple, brutal multiplier. One extra point of unemployment costs the country exactly 2% of its GDP. That bridges the gap perfectly, translating these abstract unemployment metrics directly into hard, tangible economic output.
Which brings us to Section 4, why are wages sticky?
So you might be wondering, why don't wages just instantly plummet the second a recession hits? We call this wage stickiness, and it's driven by four main frictions. First up, imperfect info. Workers get confused by inflation and temporarily work more. Second, coordination problems. No firm wants to be the absolute first to slash pay and risk losing their top talent. Third, efficiency wages. Companies willingly overpay just to keep you happy and productive. And finally, long-term contracts legally lock in nominal wages for years, completely ignoring sudden economic shifts.
When we chain all these concepts together, we unlock our derived aggregate supply curve. We use Okune's law for employment data, factor in corporate price markups, and then apply the Phillips curve for wages. It's basically a four-step mathematical engine that perfectly explains our upward-sloping intermediate supply curve. Time to graduate to the advanced stuff. Section 5, expectations and stagflation. Heading into the 1970s, policymakers kind of thought they had the economy completely figured out. But then stagflation hit. We're talking simultaneous high unemployment and skyrocketing inflation. This totally broke the old models. So what were they missing? Expected inflation. If you get a 3% raise, but you expect 10% inflation, your standard of living is tanking. Because of that, workers rationally started demanding massive raises up front, which violently shifted the entire supply curve upward. This dynamic forced a massive pivot to the expectations-augmented Phillips curve. It was a total revolution in economic thought. Because expected inflation passes one-for-one into actual inflation, that policy cheat code we talked about,
It was just an illusion. You simply cannot permanently trade higher inflation for lower unemployment. Once society expects the inflation, you end up right back at the natural rate of unemployment, just with a much, much higher cost of living.
And finally, Section 6, Supply Shocks in Action.
To truly master this class and tether these theories to reality, we have to look at supply shocks. These are massive, sudden disturbances that fundamentally alter the cost of production across an entire economy. An adverse shock violently forces prices up and chokes output. A favorable shock, on the other hand, does the exact opposite. This is the real-world catalyst for absolutely everything we've mapped out today.
You can see this playing out right across modern history. The OPEC oil embargoes of the 1970s made energy incredibly expensive. That was a brutal, adverse supply shock that triggered the exact stagflation we just talked about. But look at the late 1990s. The computing boom acted as a massive, favorable supply shock. Efficiency skyrocketed, shifting the curve outward and sparking incredible economic growth with almost zero inflation.
Given how heavily these macroeconomic theories dictate our daily reality, I want to leave you with this to consider. What is going to be the next global supply shock? Will a massive breakthrough in artificial intelligence be the ultimate favorable shock, driving unprecedented output? Or will geopolitical tensions over essential resources trigger a dark, new, adverse era? Having this macro toolkit we just built is literally the only way to make sense of whatever comes next. Keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.